and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca and I'm the event planner of the Microsoft Reactor New York. We will share some resources with you in the chat momentarily, but before we begin, I'd like to quickly review just two items, our code of conduct and our event guidelines. So our code of conduct, Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement in the chat, but we just ask that you're mindful of your commentary. Just remain professional and on topic. This session will be recorded. It will be available on demand through our Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 48 to 72 hours. I'll share the link with you in the chat for that channel momentarily as well. If you have not done so before, if you've not been on a live stream through YouTube, you will need to create an account on YouTube or depending where you're tuning in from if you want to engage in the chat. Otherwise, if you have questions for us, you can always reach out to us after the session concludes. We'll share some contact information of our speakers so you can follow up with them directly. So which brings us to today's session. The Reactor is joined by Gwyn, a cloud advocate here at Microsoft, and Sonia Conti, a senior network and systems engineer. Let me pull them up here. Here we go. Welcome, welcome.
Hi.
Hello. This is our first session with Gwyn for the new year. So today, we're going to be deploying web application with Azure Resource Management templates. And it's going to be running for about 60 minutes, give or take a little bit. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat throughout. We'll try to get to those as the session goes, but otherwise get to them at the end of it. Gwyn's pretty good, I'd say. I'd say you're really good at answering, staying on top of this question. So,
absolutely. Thank you so much, Rebecca, as always, for the amazing introduction. Happy New Year to those who, I guess, celebrate New Year's.
Happy New Year's,
everyone. There's quite a bit.
Good turnout
in the chat. Great turnout. This is a
fantastic, excited,
very interesting topic. So I'm not surprised really. But yeah, hi everyone. As Rebecca mentioned, feel free to add all your questions to the chat. I'm actually going to be co-hosting, so we're going to be co-pilot today. The expert today is Sonia. Sonia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. We actually have a series of videos. So today we're talking a little bit about ARM, deploying some things. Next week we're talking a little bit about monitoring, right? And then the week after that, we're talking about security. And all of this is going to be sort of around just Azure, web applications, but mainly focused more on the, I guess, back end and not necessarily the development, right? So Sonia, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself? What do you do? How long have you been working with Microsoft Technologies? I don't know. What's your favorite Azure service? Things like that.
Yes, I'd love to. Hi, first of all, Happy New Year to everyone in this chat. I'm Sonia, I'm based in Malta, and I'm currently working as a senior networks and systems engineer at an MSP. So at the moment, my role is mostly focused on helping customers with their migration journey to Azure Cloud. I've been working with Azure for the past 4 years now. I conduct assessments to evaluate our customers' environment, both on-prem and in the cloud. And we put forward recommendations on how they can migrate their resources to Azure or optimize their existing environment. And also in the end, we do manage their environment. Other than that, I'm very passionate about anything Azure related. Yeah, and mostly when it comes to scripting and automating, I would say. So
very, very cool. I think when it comes to cloud, people tend to focus a little bit too much about like code and programming and like languages and things like that, and we forget that there's this whole world of like other services and other thing and like traditional infrastructure and migrations and on-prem stuff, right? Before we dive into like what we're actually going to talk about today, I have a question for you, because I know you work a lot with migrations. Have you seen sort of like an increase in companies and businesses moving their infrastructure, migrating to the cloud in like the past couple of years, or do you think has it been steady? Like, what have you seen?
Yes, definitely. So in the recent years, we did have quite a large number of customers migrating their on-prem environment, and not just new startups where they opt directly to deploy their environment in the cloud. But yes, we've seen quite a large number of customers making their first step to the cloud.
Very, very cool. And this, I can think of so many questions to ask about just migrations, but maybe we'll make a whole session
Yeah.
or series around that. But today we're talking about, I guess, probably the thing we're going to talk about the most is ARM, right?
Yes.
Probably ARM and deployments with ARM. And I know there's a website, like sort of like a demo project that you've built for this. And for everyone who's in the chat, we have links to the GitHub repos that Sonia's put together. There's an API, there's a web app, and then there's the actual repo that contains the ARM templates in there. And I know you have a demo website that's actually already deployed that you sort of want to walk us through first. So let me bring up your screen and we can actually just get started because there's plenty to cover and we're going to try to fit it all in an hour. We have website, we have some diagrams, we have some visual code stuff to show you, some Azure portal stuff, and some time for questions. As always, feel free to ask during the presentation. But yeah, let's dive right into this. I guess this is sort of like what gets deployed, like the end result, right?
Exactly. Yes. So in the end, we will be deploying a website, and it will look something similar to this one. So this is quite a simple website. It is calling an API to display and showcase some of the products. For this session, I opted with a fitness theme for this website, given that it's the new year and we're all into starting to work out. Yeah. So yes, this is a dummy website, but we can interact with this and we can browse the different products that the gym membership provides. We can filter if we want a membership or perhaps a gym class, and we can select a product and add it to the cart, right? So yes, so when we think about a website that is deployed in Azure, what does that actually mean? So if we have a look at the diagram of what we need to deploy a website similar to this would be like a general diagram of the resources, right? So the first section here that we can see is that, first of all, there isn't too many resources that we would need to build quite a steady website. So the first resource that we see is the app service plan. In simple words, this is what will be hosting our application, where we are defining the compute power of the application. So in order to be able to deploy a web app and an API app, we need the app service hosting plan. There are different pricing tiers which determine which features are available for the website that you would like to host, which in our case, it's the free tier. So we are quite limited with the functionality that we can deploy with our website. We have the web app, which is the app service resource where we are pushing our web code. And similarly, we have the API app, which we are using to push our API code. And for the backend, we are using Azure SQL database, where we have the logical server and the database, which is hosting the backend of the application. So to deploy this website, obviously there are different ways that we can go about it. We can deploy it using the Azure portal, but obviously we would need to deploy each resource one by one.
Would take a lot of time, probably.
Definitely. We can do it using PowerShell script, or CLI, or else we can opt using an ARM template, which is our preferred way to do this. So ARM template is infrastructure as code. So it's a template that enables you to automatically provision your environment with no manual intervention. And this obviously brings a number of advantages. So the first thing that comes to mind would be speed, where it might take you quite a long time to deploy a new environment from scratch using the portal, for example, whereas you can deploy the same environment within a few minutes using a template. There's also consistency and reusability, because you can reuse the same piece of code and you have a guarantee that you will always get the same output, right? So next we can have a look at the template that we will be using. So to deploy ARM templates, I like to use Visual Studio Code. And on the left-hand side, we can see the repositories that I'm using to deploy this website. So the first one contains the ARM templates. We also have the code for the API app and also the code for the web app. But for the purpose of this demo, we will mostly look into the ARM templates. So what is an ARM template, right? So an ARM template is mostly made up of two files. We have the parameter.json file, and we also have the template.json file. If we have a look at the parameters files first, it usually contains a list of parameters that will be passed to the main template. The parameters can be thought of the fields that we fill in from the portal when we create a new resource. These are usually the name of the resource, but it obviously depends on the main template. So in our case, we are passing the name of the different resources. We have the name for the hosting plan, the web app name, the API name. We are also identifying the SKU of the hosting plan. So this is the free tier that we selected, and we can also pass like the SQL login and password for the SQL server.
I'm assuming that these parameters will change depending on like what resource you're deploying, right? I think like when you go into the portal, it's not all the time you're being asked like the same things like for each resource. So that would change
Yes.
also.
Exactly, yes. So this is up to you to select what parameters you want to pass. So it can be either the name of the resource. It obviously depends on the different types of resources that you select. If you select a VM, for example, you can pass the different size of the VM that you would like to deploy. So the idea behind the parameters file is that you have a fixed template file, and then you would only change the parameter file depending on the different parameters that you want to pass for the same template.
Okay, interesting. And when you sort of write these files, you don't have to start them from scratch. I'm assuming there's a place that you can get these like sort of like you kind of just fill them out kind of thing.
Yes, definitely. So one thing you can do is you can browse to GitHub repositories, and there's a list of already predefined templates there. And also there are some extensions within Visual Studio Code that would like auto-populate some of the fields or resource definition that you would like to deploy. And we will also see how you can do this at a later stage. So
okay, awesome.
If we move on to the templates file, it is mostly split into three sections, the one that I have deployed here. The first section is the parameters, where we are defining the parameters that we are expecting. So this would be in line with the parameters file. So here we are defining the parameters that we are expecting from the user to provide us. So in this case, most of the parameters are the name of the actual resource that is going to be deployed. Moving on to the next section, we have the variables section. These are fixed variables, which are also requested from the resource. So within the resource definition, we do make references to these variables. So here, as a variable, I am providing the repository URL for the web app and also repository URL for the API code. And in the last section, we have the resources. So this is the resource definition to deploy each and every resource. So in our case, we have an SQL server, which is defined by this piece of code. We are deploying a database, some firewall rules, the app service hosting plan, the web app. And if we have so obviously you're not expected to know these by heart. They do have a similar structure for all the different resources. So each one contains a type where we are defining the different type of the resource, if it's a web app, if it's an API, an SQL database. The next one is the name, where we are defining the name of the resource that is going to be deployed. The API version. The API version may change over time because when there are some changes to the service, a new API version is introduced, and the properties that it is expecting also change with that. The location, so we define where the location is being deployed. We can also define any dependencies. So for example, in this case, for a web app, it is important that the app service plan is created first. So we define the app service plan under the depends on section. So if, for example, it tries to create the web app, but the app service plan is not created yet, once it reaches this step, it will stop. It will make sure that the app service plan is created. If not, it will create the app service plan first, and then will return to the web app section at a later stage. And then there are a number different properties for different resources that are going to be deployed. And in this particular case, we also have some children resources. So here we are configuring the source control, where we are making the reference to the repository URL. So in this section, we are telling the app service that the web app code can be found from this variable that we are passing here, which is the URL of the GitHub repository containing the repository URL. So yes, we can, if we don't know the template of the resource, we can add from Visual Studio Code. It will also help us, and we can select resource that we can create, and it will, for example, if we want to create an MSG, it will give us
See, yes. I haven't worked with, so I was mentioning this to you before, like I think 2 weeks ago, like I had been learning Bicep and like the extensions of how powerful it is and how it like you literally just have to like, it's kind of like just fill in the blanks kind of thing. Yes. But I've never worked really with ARM besides like, you know, you can download the ARM template from the portal. Like once you deploy a resource, you can download it from there. I've done those, but I've never like filled them out or anything like that. So I'm not very familiar with like the tooling, but we have a question here that kind of goes along with tooling is, can you also use Visual Studio, or is VS Code the preferred choice?
Yes, you can also use Visual Studio. My personal preference is Visual Studio Code because I'm more familiar with that. But yes, it also works with Visual Studio. There are also some extensions there.
People are asking about your extensions on Visual Studio Code. Quite a popular question there. Do you know the name of it, or?
I believe it's ARM something. Let me check real quick. I think it's Azure Resource Management.
Yeah, I'm sure it's like an official Azure one. Just you really probably just have to find the name there.
Exactly.
Yeah, someone else asked here.
Yeah, I think it's this one, the Azure Resource Manager tool.
There we go. Everyone, Azure Resource Manager tool. I'm the same. Like I prefer Visual Studio Code for the things I work with, and then Visual Studio I really only use if I'm like developing like proper .NET apps because it's like so capable. But it's also, I don't know if you have this issue, but it's so overwhelming. I like how Visual Studio Code seems like more minimal, a little bit like more focused, and then Visual Studio is just like a whole. Obviously, the difference between an editor and an IDE, right? So before we move on and like just kind of like to summarize this, so we have the two files. We have the template and the parameters, and the template is really what's sort of like defining the infrastructure itself, and then the parameters is what you're passing in to sort of like customize the template to for whatever scenario you need it to be.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
So
and when you and when you're working with, say, so you have like environments that are like development and then production, would you have different templates for like development production, or would you just work with like the parameters to make that like use the same template but just provide different parameters?
So there are different ways that you can construct the template, the main template.json file as well. So you could either have the scenario that we are looking into right now, where we have one main template and we are defining all the different resources within the same template. Or else we could have different templates for different resources. So one dedicated template to deploy the SQL server and one of them to deploy the web app, for example. And then we can have a master template which calls the different
Like all
templates
individual
that,
ones.
exactly.
And in your like day to day as like working in production and doing this for a living, what do you usually see the most of, or like what's like a best practice?
I do have a mix of both, to be honest. It really depends on the environment. But I like the one to have it more modular, so I can reuse the template more often, and I just
Okay.
select the different resources that I need, and I just call it from the master template with minimal changes to the actual code. Obviously,
Okay.
then only changing the parameters depending on the customer.
Okay. Very cool. So you will end up having like a bunch of templates that you can just customize and not have to create from scratch. Like if you have like sort of infrastructures that might be similar, you can probably grab like the template from one of them, or like the I guess the group of templates from one of them, and then just kind of like customize it to your need, and you're not really reinventing anything. You're just using what you already have.
Exactly, yes. So that is
Perfect.
the main idea behind using these ARM templates, because there, you don't need to make any changes. You just update the parameters file and you have a completely new environment deployed
Okay.
to your needs, basically.
Awesome. One last question here. If someone wanted to become more like familiar with ARM templates and sort of like be able to better understand like how they work and how they can sort of like customize them, do you have any sort of like I mean, besides like actually doing it for work, do you recommend any like I don't know, go try this, or like some, I don't know, something
Uh-huh.
to better learn?
So one thing that helped me to better understand the ARM templates, other than actually testing it out and deploying an ARM template, is if you go on the portal and you create a new resource, I believe that it will allow you to download the actual template. So, if, for example, I try to create a new resource. I believe that in the end of the process that you create the resource, it will actually let you download the template.
Oh yeah,
You
you're
will need to
right.
fill.
I think so. It's at like once it's done like verifying. Yeah,
Yes.
I think yeah. I could, yeah, because I've what I've done is, so this is my issue. Like I go like for example a virtual machine or something like that, and I'll download that, and it's like really long, even though it's one resource, and that's like kind of overwhelming to me. But now that you're telling me that it's more of like a lot of this doesn't change. Now I'm gonna like go into like later on I'm going to my portal. I'm gonna like download a bunch of templates and just kind of really look at them and understand that I don't really have to like work with every single line. It's more of like you just kind of have to change it as it fits, right?
Exactly.
So that all right, that's good to know.
And
Well,
even
yeah,
if you have already deployed resources, you can download the template of that deployed resource, and you can um, look into that and see the actual code.
awesome. Here, Azure has an amazing path to learn ARM templates. That is correct. And I've also linked some sort of helpful Microsoft Learn modules. And if you go to this link here, and you're going to be able to find more things to practice and get hands-on, because I admit it's kind of infrastructure as code is the one thing that I find overwhelming. just because it's like it's code, but it's for infrastructure, not like what I'm typically used to for like development. But you know, I guess it's kind of the same, but just you're building different things, kind of thing, right? Yeah, it says after you create, you can download. Yeah, see, lots of people helping in the chat. All right, what do you got next for us?
So next we can actually deploy this template. So to do so, I'd like to do it using a PowerShell script. So the first piece of code actually creates a resource group, and then we are calling, we are starting the deployment. Let me just run this. So here what we're doing is we are creating a new Azure resource group deployment. We are defining the resource group where we want to deploy this template, and we are making a reference to the template and parameters files. So this is the URI of the template and parameter files, which are defined a bit further up here. So this is hosted in GitHub, and if we go on the Azure portal, we can see that the actual resource group was created and that the deployment was started. So the app that we are deploying now is called Contoso Finance, and we can see the resources being created. On the left-hand side, if we go on the deployments, we can see the ongoing deployments that we have. And this is where we can see that the resources are being deployed. So whilst this is deploying, it usually takes around 3 minutes to deploy. We can recap a bit on the architecture diagram and on the templates that we are using. So I'm using the deploy.ps1 file, which is a PowerShell script, which all it is doing is it's calling the ARM templates, which is made up from the parameters.json file and the template.json file. Within the template file, we are defining the resources that we want to deploy, where we have the app service plan, the web app, API app, and the backend SQL database. And we are also making a reference to the web app code and the API code, which is configuring the actual web app and API app with that. And then we will get the website eventually.
We have a few questions here that I've been trying to find answers to. But do you know? So you mentioned there's a repo that has like sort of examples of ARM templates. Do you know it off the top of your head, or I could like search for it while we wait for everything to finish deploying? But I knew this was going to be an interesting topic because people love infrastructure as code. But we've got a question here about can you provide a link describing publishing a container using a template? Can you integrate ARM templates into Azure DevOps pipelines? Do you use Azure DevOps pipelines?
Yes. We do use it, and it is possible to deploy it.
Yeah, with so ARM infrastructure as code in general, it's like one of the DevOps practices. So you have like infrastructure as code, version control. You have what's the other one? CI/CD. So the whole purpose of declaring your or I guess describing your infrastructure as code is that so you can put it in version control, and then you can sort of automate its deployment alongside the deployment of your code as well. So think of like GitHub Actions, Circle CI, Azure DevOps. What are some other popular CI/CD tools? I feel like there's like so many different CI/CD tools, but all these like and if you were to use something like Terraform or Bicep or ARM or do you know any other infrastructure as code services? I think there's like Pulumi, something like that. There's a bunch, but all of those are meant to sort of be put into like pipelines. But ARM can templates can be deployed. It can definitely work here. I haven't done it. I've done it with like GitHub Actions because I personally haven't used Azure DevOps, but I know like a lot of people do.
Yes,
Isn't it Azure Quick Start Templates? Oh, let me look.
I believe so. Yes, I think that's the one.
Azure
Quick Start.
Start Templates. Let me look that up, and if it is that, oh, this is fantastic. Yes, let me add this in here.
And that's a great starting point to start building.
Oh, I think we got one here. Quick start using Azure. Yeah, that's fine. That's perfect. Let me add it here. So that is the link for a bunch of templates. All right. Let's get back to. I'll keep getting at the questions towards the end. I don't want to get through the rest of these. But yeah, this is the link where you can probably find one for containers. To Bob, who was asking about this one. All right, awesome.
Yeah.
So what do we have?
So here we can see that all the resources were successfully deployed. And if we browse to the resource group, we can now see the resources. So we have the app service plan, the website, the web app, and the API app, the SQL database, and the SQL server. So if we browse to the website, we can see that under the deployment center, as part of the template that we just deployed, it also did some of the configuration where we are connecting the repository of the web app and some additional configuration, which is connecting to the API. So here we are defining the application settings, the offers API URL, and also the connection string for the database. So with that template, we are ready and we have the website live and up and running. So this will probably take some time to load given that we opted for the free tier.
Okay, I have like a questions to ask you, sort of just based off your experience with working with ARM, but we can wait till this loads. But I know you know what? Let's just look at this. I was gonna like get some more questions, but we can look at this. Yeah, this is the like similar to the application that was like at the beginning, right?
Yes, so pretty much this is using the same template of the web app, just the user interfaces. It's a bit different. Similarly, we have a bunch of offers and we can browse to the different products that Contoso Finance has. And yeah, pretty much it's a very similar website to the one that we previously saw.
The link is the Contoso Finance demo web, correct? That's the web app itself.
Yes, so that one is for the web app, the demo web.
Okay, fantastic. So I was going to add, if people want to sort of practice, because you and I were talking about this, like with us not being front-end developers, it's sort of hard for us to like practice our skills or like, you know, our infrastructure skills or our DevOps skills or whatever it might be because we don't have something to work with.
Exactly.
But this repo you have here has sort of like it's a .NET web app. It has like some basic functionality and such, but it's great because you don't have to like come up with something. It's like, go figure out how to deploy that with ARM. Go figure out how to deploy that with I don't know, Terraform. Go figure out like how to put together a CI/CD pipeline using the infrastructure as code templates that you create for this app, and you don't have to worry about creating something, right?
Exactly.
I used to tell people to like, you know, create like a simple static website like your resume or something like that, but using something like this is actually fantastic as well. Bruno is here. Hey, Bruno. Bruno's another cloud advocate on our team. This is so cool. I'm tempted to package and deploy some of my demos, test to learn more about this. Exactly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab a bunch of my projects and then I'm going to, or maybe, you know what? I have an idea. Maybe we can grab one of my projects and do a session live where we create the template for it.
Definitely.
That's
for sure.
We should totally do that because I know if I do it by myself, I'm going to make a ton of mistakes. We have some questions. I have some more questions, but in terms of the like what we've done, we've covered a lot, and we did it pretty in a good amount of time. We went through the initial diagram, we went through the final product, we went through the ARM files, then we saw your PowerShell scripts to deploy the stuff. We deployed it, and we checked the resources in the portal, and this is the final product. And the thing is, like, all of that happens in what, like 35 minutes? So we covered a lot. But in reality, how long, for like an application like this, how long would it say it would take you to like sort of get all the infrastructure as code done for it?
So for an application like this, it depends, I guess, because to actually build the template itself, not much, because there's a bunch of already available templates out there that we can reference to and sort of add. There are some configuration. I think the most challenging part was to connect the API to the website and making sure that these are communicating well with one another. So I think this was the hardest part for a template like this, but it doesn't take too long to build a new template from scratch.
When it comes to like testing templates, is it literally just, hey, deploy it and see what fails? Or like how do you?
Yes.
Like, what does that look like?
So within the ARM itself, it does have that capability that it will give you quite clear indication from where the error is coming from. So yeah, it's like to test it out, I will sort of make changes as I go along.
Make
and
a mistake.
yeah, and it will guide you, and it will tell you like probably this error is coming from that line, and yeah, sort of.
Okay, like similar to like developing code actually.
Yeah.
So what do you think is like the hardest, and it's like just in general, what have you found something that's like annoying or hard when it comes to working with ARM in general?
Nothing in particular that annoys me, I guess. I'm really looking forward to try the bicep. I've heard that bicep it's simpler to use, so I look forward to get familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm a fan of bicep in terms of like it's just to me it's easier to write and to read. Like, when you're working with JSON, it's not really meant for like a human to like understand it, right? It's great for a computer to understand it. But yeah, but I and again, I have so many of these sessions that I want to do with you now, and I think it's clear that the chat's loving it. There's like a really great turnout, and I think these are very, very important and actually popular topics, like the back end, the infrastructure stuff. But at the beginning, someone asked us. Hold on, let me find this this question here that we have. Where did we go? It was right at the beginning. Sign me up. Sign me up for a migration series, particularly if you use containers. Do you use containers? What's your relationship with containers?
Not much. I did work with some Kubernetes clusters. We have deployed some Kubernetes clusters, but not much at the moment. The large number of customers that we have are using virtual machines, but obviously when we are looking to migrate, we also try to refactor into a PaaS service and containers. Yes, but yeah, I think the majority are VMs at the moment on-prem.
I think with with new technology coming out, and containers and Kubernetes and Docker, all these things are, I would say, relatively new compared to virtual machines. It's easy for us as, maybe beginners or trying to upskill to get so sucked into like, if I don't learn the latest thing, the newest thing, then I'm going to sort of be left behind. But then we forget about the amount of companies out there that are still using very, very traditional infrastructure. Like you said, you have the majority of customers are working with VMs, and yes, they're moving towards like something different, whether that be like app services or containers, like you mentioned. But there's still so much work out there to be done with, like, good old traditional virtual machines, right? Yeah. But this is interesting. Migration series, I'm very, very interested in doing that, and maybe we'll plan some stuff around that.
Sure.
But let's go down. I know there's more questions here. Let's see. Oh, off topic. What tool do you use to create the diagram you showed earlier?
I used Visio, so I use Visio for my diagrams.
Okay, there you go, Visio. I don't know what I use, but does Visio have like a standard icon library you can just drag stuff?
Yes, you would need to, like, I found some on GitHub as well to get the icons. So
Oh, cool. All right, awesome. Let's see. Did you have anything you wanted to add, or we could just keep going through questions?
Yeah, I guess with ARM, it's a matter of getting used to it. Then it's pretty the same structure for different resources, and you'll like trial and error, I guess,
I guess
with new resources.
Yeah, it's hard until you dive into it, right? Let's see. I want to bring up more of these. Someone says hello from Wisconsin. Hello. Thank you for joining us here. Here's a question. Can we store linked ARM templates in an Azure DevOps repository and use it in the same Azure DevOps pipeline?
Yes, that is possible to store it in Azure DevOps rather than GitHub. And yes, you can connect it to Azure DevOps pipeline.
Maybe that's another serious idea. Like, how do we configure once we have our templates, how do we configure it in a pipeline? That would be a good idea too.
Yeah.
For us to cover there. Yes, I'm looking forward to Bicep as well. Yeah. See, there's a lot of learn modules around Bicep too. Like, I think there's a whole learning path that's like 10 hours that I started. Okay. But it's really helpful if people are interested. Hey, Liam is our cloud advocate based out of London. Hello, Liam. Awesome demo. I will be trying this out with some of my projects. See, you're getting everyone to learn ARM.
Hyped up to do more ARM.
Everything is ARM at the end of the day. That's very true. That's actually very true. Like, the way Azure, you may see a UI, right? But at the end of the day, behind of it's ARM.
It translates to ARM.
Yeah, it translates to ARM. So that's great. This is an important point to be made. Let's see. Is there an example template that publishes to a Kubernetes cluster and it will configure the environment such that it is a workable environment? What is the name of that template? So we have that repo that I put in here. The examples, you kind of have to like look through those and figure out which one works best for your case scenario. Unless you have any other advice, Sonia, on this one.
Yeah, I would look into that repository with the Azure Quick Start Guide. And it might be the case that you would need to sort of get a piece of code from this template and a piece of code from this template and sort of make up your own template. But
yeah, you're definitely going to have to customize it because it's hard to know like what you would consider as a workable environment. Because that's different for like every I guess project or application or whatever it is that you're deploying. Exactly. Right? What about Azure Portal to the diagram? I don't understand this question. I think you might be asking if you use the Azure Portal to create diagrams. I don't think so, right? I've never done that. I know there are some resources that will display, like a lot of like networking ones will display diagrams, but that isn't like every single resource.
Yeah.
Why would you use DevOps over GitHub Actions? I don't know. For me, it's always been like whatever the project lives, that's where I'm going to use the CI/CD tool from. I've never used Azure DevOps because the places that I've worked has just always used GitHub and GitHub Actions. I don't know if you have an opinion on this.
Yes, I would say it depends on what you're used to the most or what the company uses. So I don't use GitHub Actions a lot, I would say. So
yeah, and again, it's a lot of these practices will translate over to the services. Like services will have like different names for them, and maybe you'll like work with them in different ways, but it's still, at the end of the day, you're still just deploying these kinds of things, putting them through a pipeline. What just changes is the syntax and stuff
Exactly.
like that. Thank you so much. Looking forward to ARM with Azure DevOps session. Now we have to plan that. Here's a great question: why ARM templates instead of an Azure CLI Bash script?
Okay, so for my end, I would say with ARM, you can modularize the templates, and like as I mentioned before, one way to do it is you can have a bunch of ARM templates and then a master script, and you would call the resources that you would need. I think then it comes down to personal preference as well. I'm more familiar with ARM rather than CLI, so that would be my personal preference. Not
Yeah.
sure about you, Gwen.
The way I see it is, I love the CLI for me. Like whenever I'm creating anything, I always just go for the CLI. Like I'll figure out what command to use for like quick, for experimenting, for like sort of like patching together a solution, like kind of in the figuring out stage, I'll use the CLI for that. But then when it comes to like full, like production ready, or even like development ready, like things where other people are going to have to be included on, it goes back to like infrastructure as code. And that's because the majority of companies that you're going to be working at will be using infrastructure as code, right? So it's like you're sort of like, it's like building on skills that you're probably going to use more in production. I think like scripts aren't really meant to, I mean, see, if scripts were meant to handle your infrastructure as code wouldn't be a thing. That's the way I see it. Like there's proper tools for both. They both have their places, but I think once it's like production ready infrastructure, you got to use infrastructure as code. So in this case, it would be ARM, but it could be, Terraform, Bicep, Pulumi, whatever it might be, right? Is ARM an alternative to Kubernetes YAML files for Kubernetes deployments? Kubernetes YAML is, I actually don't know what that is. Are you familiar with?
No.
Is that a way of describing your Kubernetes deployments? If so, like ARM is, I guess, Azure's flavor of infrastructure as code. And then we keep mentioning Bicep, but Bicep is sort of an implementation on top of ARM. It's still ARM under everything. Like it all like that comment said, it all comes back to ARM. Bicep is just like a nicer way of working with ARM. But yeah, I guess Kubernetes YAML files sound like it's the way of describing your deployments, and then ARM is the way of describing your deployments for Azure, if that makes sense. Azure DevOps. All right, I'm trying to get through all of these questions. We have a little bit more of time, so if you have more questions, make sure you get them in now. And like I mentioned, next week we're talking about monitoring. So we're going to be sort of like diving into some monitoring aspects around this application that we've deployed in this session. And then do you have sort of any details or any insight into what we're going to be covering in that one?
Yes, so we will be going on an overview of Azure monitoring, in particularly to web apps, and we will be deploying some alerts for the web app that we deployed. And we'll dive into that in more detail.
Fantastic. And the goal for this series is like when we sat down like for our first session and like sort of to talk about like what are we going to talk about, and this was like like 2-3 months ago. We wanted to really put together a series of videos that was like real like production. Like, when you're deploying an application, it's not just done like once it's like in Azure, right? Once it's in the cloud, it's not done. There's monitoring, there's securing, there's things that you continuously have to do to it. So that's why we sort of wanted to string together these series and then covering monitoring, covering security. And then we feel like that's like the most important thing. Obviously there's stuff like cost optimization and like budgets and alerts and stuff like that, but we felt like for this first couple of sessions, it's like a fantastic like covering all your bases in here. Here we go. Kubernetes YAML is not specific to Azure. That's the perfect answer. Like Kubernetes YAML is wherever you need to use Kubernetes with, and you can deploy it on, I guess, anywhere. Whereas ARM is specific to Azure Cloud, right? Yeah, there you go. That's a solid answer. I think so. Can you revisit Siegfried's question is ARM an alternative to Kubernetes YAML files for Kubernetes deployment? YAML is a file extension for the config. Is ARM an alternative to Kubernetes YAML? I wouldn't. So, referencing this last comment here, since ARM is specific to Azure and then Kubernetes isn't specific to Azure, you'll see the difference there, right? So I would say no, it's not an alternative there. Yeah, people keep telling us yet another markup language, YAML, similar to. Have you worked with YAML?
Not much, but you will use them for the DevOps part, I guess.
Yeah, I've used it in GitHub Actions, YAML. YAML's the one that you have to be careful with the spaces, right? It's like if it's not indented the right way, it's going to give you an error. I think it's like that.
I guess.
Don't quote me on that because I remember I was figuring out this for deploying my resume a couple months ago. And for me, it's once it was there, once the action was there, I didn't really touch it at all. And it's as long as it works, I'm not but I remember it being a pain because the only way GitHub Actions has to test your actual YAML files is you actually have to deploy it. There's no local way to troubleshoot these things. You could run your code locally to troubleshoot, but GitHub Actions didn't have a way to do that. And it was just a pain. Yes, YAML is very sensitive. There we go. So it's very sensitive to the spaces. All right, awesome. People, get your questions in for the last couple of minutes. We're going to end very soon. We covered a lot. Again, we want to share your LinkedIn. Rebecca, could we drop Sonia's LinkedIn there? So for any follow-up questions, you'll have your LinkedIn.
Feel free to reach out.
YAML I use for pipeline configuration, Azure Jenkins pipelines. It went over my head though. Yeah. I would agree. Yeah, YAML is one of those things that once it's there, I'm not touching it anymore.
I dropped her LinkedIn further up.
Further up. Here we go. Okay, so that's Sonia's LinkedIn. This is where you can follow up with questions and things like that. In other words, okay, perfect. I'm trying to make sure we get all the questions here. In other words, is there any reason to use ARM with Azure Kubernetes?
So I guess if you have your whole infrastructure deployed with ARM, I would deploy Azure Kubernetes with ARM as well. So we would have continuity and one template for the full infrastructure, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot their first part here. I'm thinking there might be some advantages to using ARM instead of Kubernetes YAML. Kubernetes is flexible and will do JSON and XML too. Yeah, so like Sonia said, is if you have other infrastructure that you're deploying with ARM, you might benefit from using just ARM for everything, because ARM will be able to deploy anything in Azure. But if you're doing just something specific to and not using ARM, something specific to Kubernetes to YAML, let's say that. And the reason I say Kubernetes is because this person said it in this question, and you don't need to deploy anything else. Which I think when it comes to Azure, I'm pretty sure you're gonna have to deploy other things, right? It's just that single resource. Because you're gonna need a resource group no matter what. You're gonna need a storage account most likely no matter what.
VNet.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff, right? So in other words, yeah, if you have other infrastructure already deployed, I guess, deployed with ARM, why not? Is there a way? None. Never mind. I feel like we'll probably get into rabbit hole if I ask this question. When an ARM template is being applied, is it possible to view the output during the execution such that you can see what commands are being executed and what the results are?
So yes, in the deployment. So if you go on the resource group and you can see the deployment that was that's being run there, you can see the outputs and you can see the resources that are being created. So from the portal, yes.
I think, let me see if I can add your screen here. This way. Here we go.
So I'm not sure if you're referring to this one, but so this is the template that we just deployed, and we can see the input of the parameters. So this is referring to the parameters file. The outputs, we didn't define any outputs, so we don't have any outputs. This is the actual template that we deployed and the resources. I'm not sure if this answers your question, but I would say that from here.
Yeah, it shows everything that gets created with the template. I think this person might be asking, like, if you can actually see what command your like Azure is executing. Like maybe there's like a create VM command that gets triggered because it's defined in the JSON template. That I don't think you can see, like sort of like a verbose mode, if for lack of a better word. I don't think that's possible. Like it'll show you like, oh, this line of ARM like JSON actually is equivalent to these commands, that kind of thing. I don't really know like what. Like
no, I don't think so, because the ARM doesn't translate to like the command. It's sort of from the template itself, I guess, that it just creates it.
Yeah, I'm assuming like this ARM like interacts with some sort of like API in Azure that tells it what to go and like deploy and stuff. But that's like back end stuff. Like we don't really have access to that. Can you go back to if you go to, where was it? Template? I think it was template.
Script.
No, go back to inputs maybe. It was like there was some place that had like operation details. Where was that? Oh yeah, here. What is operation details on the right? I guess this is more resource ID type. You get provisioning operation command operation name. Ah, interesting. Okay.
So this is pretty similar to the information that we are providing in the template. So the type of the resource, I guess.
Oh, okay. I get. Here's a follow-up question. Will applying an ARM template generate a script such as a PowerShell script? No. No. So you're getting confused with like using a script and then using infrastructure as code, in this case ARM. You can deploy things straight from like just putting a bunch of like commands in a script, or you can use JSON and then use a script to deploy the ARM template itself. But they're like two different things essentially, right? One doesn't necessarily translate to the other, or it doesn't translate to the other at all. Are those operation details in a log somewhere? So outside of what you're seeing here, like what kind of log are you like wondering? I'm asking this person here. Do you know if like, I guess there's a.
I believe that from somewhere we can get the template back, but in terms of log, I would say that this is the log of the deployment. So
can we download this? Like if you click on, you see that little box on the left? What happens there? Oh, redeploy.
So we can redeploy.
Ah, interesting. Okay. So I mean, there's also I was gonna say Azure Monitor. Does Azure Monitor, can you like query for stuff from the deployment with Azure Monitor?
For the deployment, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's it. I'm thinking of auditing. Well, this information of deployment will always be here in the portal. But are you thinking more in terms of like when you audit infrastructure? I guess I'm trying to get at like what kind of task you're trying to accomplish, and then I could probably point you in like a better direction.
So here within the activity log, we probably can see that the resources were created. And even from Azure Monitor, we can put alerts in place that if, for example, a new VM is created or a new resource is created, we are alerted. So
yeah, I'm thinking that data is probably more useful than the actual deployment data, because the deployment data is more in terms of like a response to the actual like ARM template and the actual deployment itself. But if it's like an audit, usually it's like more about like when is infrastructure created, what has been created, how many of these things exist, and that kind of stuff. So that would probably be a better tool to use than something like this. And then, of course, you also have every single resource in Azure has an activity log. Like if something has any sort of interaction with that resource, you'll have an activity log in there about that. Let's see. Looks like the operation details provides what executed and how long it took to deploy. Yes. And you have all of that information there in that deployment section.
And yes, from the activity log, we can see that this template was deployed, and we can also get some JSON format.
If you're deploying something, when there's a fail, like where do you usually go to see that? Like what's failed?
So from the deployments, you would get that the resource failed, and you will also have under operations detail or under the status, it will guide you on how to troubleshoot further. So
fantastic. Yeah. Oh, hold on. Right. Probably a good section to verify if it fails. Yes. And that's the reason why I asked the questions. Is exactly the section you would come to look to find if something has been
exactly
didn't deploy correctly, right? I think we are at time. We're going to switch to full screen here. I want to thank everybody. Make sure next week, so it's next week, Thursday at the same time, so 1 p.m. Eastern, we have the next session, which we're covering monitoring. Here it is. How to monitor your web apps with Azure. Sonia, again, is going to be joining me. I'm going to be just here, here to help, I guess. But I know Rebecca usually hops on the end to sort of like close it off. But thank you so much, everyone in the chat. There's a lot of people. I think this is actually Sonia's first live stream. So everyone in the chat, tell her how amazing of a job she did.
So great.
And let me tell you, we had a very engaged chat, a really high number of turnout, and it's for your first session. This is very, very impressive. So good job. Look at all these people. Like, thank you, wonderful session, very informative. Thank you. Have a good day. So look at that. People love it. So, amazing job. Rebecca, I know you want to close us out, so it's your turn.
You know me well. So as we mentioned, this is an ongoing series. It'll be every week. Sonia will be joining us for the next 3 weeks. Woo! In it to win it, first and forever now. It seems like between all those questions and things that came up. I dropped into the chat just a little while ago a survey that is this is the plug on the Reactor side of things. We like to know who our audience is. We use that information to try to develop future content based on your, expertise level and kind of the area of your, interests go. So do fill that out if you have the time. Enter 14899 into it so we know which section you joined us on and what you're referencing. And if you're not yet a part of the Reactor community, if you've tuned in for the first time, we are constantly rolling out content. This is an international program. It's free. All of our sessions are free. We put on demand after the session completes, so you can, reference anything that we've covered generally on our YouTube channel. We're here and available. You can reach out to any one of the local Reactor event planners. Myself, I'm based out of New York, but we have 12 other physical locations, eventually with in-person coming back to us. But right now, everything's virtual, so tune in from wherever you want. Follow us on Twitter, find us on Meetup, or sign up for our newsletter. I think with that, we can wind it out. Again, thank you both. That's it. We're done now. All right. I don't need to ramble any longer. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.